Hi and welcome to this Reckon Training Academy video for the Reckon APS Exceed Professional Accounting module. Today we're going to look at the ledger creation process, and specifically we're going to look at these items. How to create a new XPA ledger using best practice from Central Console. Understand how the ledger can be sourced to create the initial structure of the file. Understand the ledger details and the importance this has on reporting. And we'll look at the ownership setup for the different entity types. We'll start this by going straight into Central Console. Within Central Console, search for the client that you want to create your new ledger for. In this case, we are going to use the Purple Family Trust. If not, you would use your asterisk to find your client. Once you've selected that, you can see whether the new entity that you need to create has the relevant practice management details completed. You can see that you have matters already set up, so you know where to put your time. It might be useful to know what are the relationships that might have been already set up, and we can see that we have 3 beneficiaries in this file. And if we've already got our addresses set up, they could be used in minutes or in the director's reports, etc., that you might want to use addresses. So if we've got this information set up, we can then go into your XPA area to create your new ledger. Within the XPA ledger, if the ledger doesn't exist, you select the plus. It will open up the new ledger screen. Within this screen, we can choose which entity if you have more than one practice entity for ledgers to be assigned to. Based on your system standards, you will have a file name that will default based on the values and attributes in your practice management system. In this case, we are keeping year-based ledgers, and I want to create the 2016 year ledger. The folder location for your ledger will be a practice standard and would not need to be changed. Where you're using year-based matters, we would recommend that you assign the ledger to the relevant year matter. And so that you can search for the description, we've also suggested that you postfix the year attached to that. This allows you to keep each year as a separate file. The default button will mean that this ledger, Purple Family Trust, will be your user default every time you open XPA. It's probably not required, so we leave that blank. The Purple Family Trust file that we're creating has 3 options to create the source of the file. And the source creation of a file will include primary ownership details of accounts, it'll include a chart of account, it will include entity structures. So inside this particular file, the most common way to create a new ledger is to use one of the Reckon APS master files. So each country for each year will produce a set of masters, and in those masters you'll see that there are entity-based templates. This is an Australian-based entity, so I'm going to use the Australian-based entity template to create the ledger. If it was a New Zealand entity, it would use the New Zealand entity-based ledger template. So this creates the initial structure of the file. By default, the initial template source is none. So if that's left at none, you need to create all your account details and all your ownership details, and you'll have a blank chart of accounts when you create the ledger. The other alternative is to use an existing ledger file. If I use the asterisks in here, I can see that I have my full ledger list. So if I was creating another family trust that was almost a mirror of this particular family trust, I could use that as my source or creation of my Purple Family Trust ledger. This is useful if you have industry-based type structures and setups. It will also create the chart of accounts the same as one file to another. In my case, however, I'm sticking with the Australian Trust template. Select OK. That will now go and convert the file and create the ledger detail screen. The ledger details screen will come through and will pre-default things from your central console. So the last name, registered name, would be used for the organisation name. So it doesn't have that prefix at the end of the year, and it's this name that would get used at the top of all your financial reports. Depending on the origin of the country, these items may change slightly. Most of them are for internal report purposes, and in this case the company number in Australia holds the ABN or the ACN. That will print the word ACN and the ACN numbers. If the number is entered as 11 straight characters, it will print the word ABN in the reports. So these have reporting consequences. In terms of the structure of the file, the entity type will determine the type of ownership that belongs to that entity. And each of these entity types will have their own ownership options. So we'll go through that in more detail in a moment. The other important thing that we need to do when we create a new file is we need to specify what year end it's going to be, or what year start it's going to be. We also need to default what number of periods we're going to create for our ledger. The number of periods you can adjust once you've started coding, doing your journals. The year start and end date, however, once we've finalised the ledger details, we cannot change that. So it's important that you get the year set up correctly when you create your ledger. Just as it is important to make sure that you've set up the right entity type. The reason why this is defaulted to the discretionary trust is because we said it was a trust client type in Central Console when we created the ledger. If it was to be a unit trust, then we could change the entity type here. The country of region will be specified, and GST is normally turned on in all the Reckon templates. It can be turned off at data entry point when you need to do this. For Australian entity templates, the default template will remain as an entity-based template. Where you're using the New Zealand Master Standards, at this point here you would change the default template to be the Reckon APS Master. Down the bottom we have the reporting status. The reporting status will affect your Exceed financial reports in terms of disclosure for reporting or non-reporting purposes. Down the right hand side there are a number of buttons. Again, the workbook will go through each one of these in more detail. If, for example, you had a 2-period ledger and you were creating perhaps an interim period of accounts and a final year end, you would set it up as a 2-period ledger. Then if I click onto the periods button, I then get to specify, well, what was the date for period 1? And if it is a different date to what defaults, then you have the ability to change that. You also need to change the period for the future year of grace. So when a ledger is created in Reckon, we create the current year and the next year, which we know as the year of grace. If you've changed something like that, this is simply just a reporting period, and it will also do the number of days calculation for assets. So it's important that you correctly create your period descriptions and dates as you require them. When we come to financial reporting, there are additional line items that you may want to have in terms of your titles of your accounts, and they're stored here under the reporting button. If I wanted to put in something like trading as, I can have up to 3 additional lines that will appear underneath the organisation name. So they're the additional headings. Your default templates might also have a draft account text pre-defaulted in. If you're doing a compilation report or an accountant's report, you'll have the name of the accountant and the type of accountants you are, and you would put in here the director or partner that is going to sign off on on the compilation report. Place signed is optional if you leave that in, if you've got multiple locations. These details that we type in the financial reporting area will carry forward from year to year. The Accounts button, if you're using a standard template, should not need to be changed. You'll notice that these will come back to whatever master chart you're selected, and they all use 3-digit main accounts and 3-digit sub accounts. And this is the next item that will change, and I'll come back to that last, depending on the entity type. It will change the details that we see within inside this screen here for the entity type form. The other items before I come back to ownership is that we have addresses. Because we've created it from Central Console, it will push through the address details from Central Console. That could be used in minutes. If I had set up a registered address in Central Console, that would come through. And an auditor, if the accounts are being audited, you would put in to who the auditor was, the type of accountants the auditor is, and the address. User fields are certainly customizable depending on the practice and reporting, not commonly used. So, as we mentioned, your year-end start date cannot be changed and your entity type can't be changed. The workbook has all the different ownership details for each entity type. For example, if I change the entity type for an Australian company, I will have the type of Australian company that it will be specified as, along with its reporting status will change your financial reports. When I change the entity type here, the ownership button will display different company ownership details to what was in the discretionary trust. For a company, you will need to enter in the directors into this area, and you'll put in what is the relevant details of the office bearers. The main items that we're really using here is a code to know which director it is, which could be an initial or a number, and a director, and then you're specifying what they are holding as office bearers. Once you've done that, you would save that, and then you'd put in the next director. Now the way that you type those will be the way that they will appear at the bottom of a compilation report or a director's report, and you also have the ability to here to say whether this director will sign the report or not. So that will depend on the legislation requirements. So that is our companies, and we also have for companies share classes. So by default there'll be an ordinary share class of 1 million shares at $1 per share. So this would need to be adjusted based on your company structure. When we change the entity type here to sole trader, you'll see that the entity ownership details will change, and they'll be based on your master charts. For partnerships, you'll need to go into the ownership area and put in the relevant partners. So if I have 2 partners, the first partner needs to be a number in this case, and I put in the name, and I need to put in a percentage for the partnership distribution. You save that and repeat that until you make up your total 100%. That percentage will be the distribution of profit, and this number here that is a 3-digit sub, it becomes a 3-digit sub account. So partner 1 share of profit account number will be 502/001 for partner 1. Opening balance 500/001 for partner 1. And that's what you'll use for the coding. The unit trust in this example, if we go into ownership, It will have the type of unit classes that you hold. If you hold more than one type of class per your trust deed, you'll need to put in a percentage. Once you put in your unit classes, you can then go into the beneficiaries, and just as with partners, when you put in the beneficiaries, for a unit trust, each beneficiary will need to put in the number of units that they hold. So in this case, we've got number of unit 1 classes, and you can put in the relevant number, and the profit distribution will be based on the number of units and classes and percentages they hold. And in this case, we have a discretionary trust, and the ownership for the discretionary trust will also be covered off in your profit distribution for discretionary trusts, as there are optional capital allowance distributions and withholding tax distribution accounts that you can use. And the beneficiaries have the option in this case to use a percentage. And in this case, for discretionary trusts, most people will have the distribution as 0 because it is a discretionary trust. You can distribute it as per your trust deed. So this will allow you to do that when we look at the profit distribution course. So those entity types here, and the ownership is more based around the Australian entity types and ownership. There are similar entity types and ownership details for New Zealand ledgers. Once you've done this, you can also see that you can refresh your details from the client PM client. So if you have existing ledgers, you can use this button once you have your links set up. Selecting OK will now finalise your ledger. It will say that the year that it is in, and it will tell you that once the ledger has been finalised, you cannot change that year-end date. I'm okay to finalise that. I've left it as a discretionary trust, and I'm now in 30th of June 2006, and I have my next period for year of grace ready to go. From a reporting point of view, I can go back in and readjust the names of the beneficiaries or the percentages I do decide to use that. Then I can go back into file details and come back into this screen. When I come back into this screen, you'll see that I have editing rights in certain areas, but I do not have the ability to change the entity type or the year-end start date. But I can go back into the ownership details, put in additional information as I need to here. So that has created now this XPA Purple Family Trust for 2016. If I'm in XPA itself, I do have the ability to create a new ledger from here. You'll see the difference if I create it within inside XPA itself. I have to create the file name, and I need to start applying the standards as it was from Central Console to be consistent. So that's why we recommend to go into Central Console first to create it from there. And in this case, we're going to set up a New Zealand example template, and perhaps this one might be a company. So I'm going to set this one up as the Reckon APS XPA New Zealand company template. Just to give you an idea with the different countries, you also have the different year-end start dates, the number of periods, so all this is consistent. And you'll notice the different type of entities available. Okay, so depending on which one you choose, we'll have the various options. Now as you go into the ownership details, they will be presented to you based on your trust templates or your partnership templates when you go and create those. I'm not going to save this one. We're going back out of here. If we go back into Central Console, after refreshing, we will see that we now have the XPA Purple Family Trust available for you here, which you can now launch straight from there or open it directly from the XPA menu. So we've now created our ledger. You're now ready to start using the ledger. So our learning outcomes. We've created a new ledger directly from Central Console for best practice setup. You understood that there were three methods to source a new ledger. They were none, from a template file, which is fairly typical, or another existing client file. We created the new ledger from within the XPA to explore the other entity types and impacts of ownership. Once the ledger has been finalised, the year end and entity type cannot be altered. Your workbook has more information on each entity type and ownership options. On behalf of the Reckon Training Academy, thank you for attending to this course. If you need more help, please contact us. Thank you.